43% of nurses want to leave the bedside, and 41% say financial necessity is the only thing keeping them there. Most of them are wrong about the math. This episode is for CRNAs and NPs who already know that they are burned out. Not nurses who are wondering if they're burned out, but nurses who know it, and who've known it for a while, and who keep showing up anyways because they can't see a financial path that lets them do anything different. Now, if you're still in your 40s and building the foundation, you might want to come back to this one in a few years. But if you are a CRNA or a nurse practitioner age 50 or older with at least $750,000 saved, and you've been saying some version of, "I want to slow down, but I'm scared," well, this conversation is for you. Now, I want to start with the language I hear most often because I think it's important to say out loud. I want to slow down, but I'm scared. I feel trapped. I don't know if I have enough. Those are not irrational thoughts. They are the natural result of a math problem that nobody has sat down and actually run for you. And when the math hasn't been run, well, then fear fills the gap. The Nurse.org 2026 State of Nursing Survey found that job satisfaction among nurses dropped to 47% this year. That's down from 55% just 1 year earlier. And that the likelihood of leaving the profession is rising again after 3 years of decline. 41% of nurses say financial necessity is the only thing keeping them at the bedside. Not purpose, not love of the work, financial necessity. Now that number tells you exactly what kind of problem this is. It is not a career problem. It's a math problem that has not been solved yet. And here's what I find when I do run that math for CRNAs or NPs in this situation. The conversation that they have been having in their head about whether they can afford to slow down is almost always based on the wrong model. They're modeling full retirement, but that's not what they're asking for. Cutting back to 3 or 4 days a week is not the same financial problem as stopping entirely. So it requires a completely different framework. And that framework is what I'm going to walk you through today. Before I get into the math, I want to say something about why the wrong model persists. CRNAs and nurse practitioners are trained to be thorough and careful. When there's uncertainty, the instinct is to be conservative, to assume the worst case scenario and then plan around it. That instinct serves you well in a clinical setting, but in retirement planning, it often backfires. Conservative assumptions applied to the wrong model produce a number that looks impossible and stops the conversation before it starts. The nurses I work with who stay stuck the longest are not the ones who have the most financial complexity. They're the ones who ran a rough number in their head based on replacing all of their income and therefore decided it was too far away and never got a second look at the actual math. That second look is what changes things. Let me introduce a hypothetical nurse practitioner that reflects a composite of what I see regularly. Imagine an NP named Sarah. She's 54 years old, working full-time in a family practice setting, earning $165,000 a year. She has $920,000 saved. The majority is in a 401k. She has a smaller amount in a Roth IRA, and she has a taxable brokerage she's been building for a few years. Now, Sarah is not trying to retire. She wants to go from 5 clinical days a week to 3. And she wants to stop feeling like the job owns her schedule. And she's been telling herself for 2 years now that she can't afford to do it. And she came in with a number in her head. $165,000. She figured she needed to replace it fully, or at least close to it, to make any change. But that assumption is what was keeping her stuck. The question is not what it takes to replace $165,000. The question is what it takes to safely live on less than that with a partial income still coming in without the plan falling apart over time. Those are very different problems with very different answers. And when you model the right problem, the math looks completely different. There are three things you have to work through to know whether cutting back is financially viable. The first is healthcare cost independence. The second is your adjusted financial independence number. And the third is portfolio drawdown sequencing. Walk through all three clearly and you have your answer. Let's start with healthcare, because this is the one most CRNAs and NPs don't model, and it's also the one that derails plans the most. When Sarah cuts back to part-time, 3 days a week, there's a real chance she loses her employer-sponsored health insurance. Now, some employers maintain coverage for part-time employees above a certain threshold, and some don't. But if she loses it, she needs her own coverage until Medicare kicks in at age 65. For a 54-year-old, ACA Marketplace coverage for a family is going to run somewhere in the range of $1,200 to $2,000 per month, depending upon your location, plan selection, and household income. Let's call it $18,000 to $24,000 per year. That's the number most people aren't accounting for when they model cutting back. But here's the part that actually changes the picture. ACA Marketplace subsidies are income-based. If Sarah's income drops from $165,000 to roughly $90,000, which is what 3 days a week at her current rate looks like, her subsidy eligibility changes significantly. At $90,000, a 54-year-old can often access meaningful ACA subsidies that bring that premium down considerably. Again, the specific subsidy depends on her household size, her state, and the plan that she chooses. But the point is that I'll have to pay for my own health insurance, and health insurance will cost me $24,000 a year, are two very different statements. And most people assume the second without modeling the first. That's the trade-off worth understanding before you make any decision. There's one more piece to the healthcare picture that matters specifically for CRNAs and NPs. Many nurses work on a 1099 basis as independent contractors, either full-time or in a blended arrangement. If Sarah shifts to a contract model at 3 days a week, she may be able to deduct a portion of her health insurance premiums as a self-employed individual. That changes the after-tax cost of coverage again and in her favor. Now, this is not an argument for any particular employment structure. It's a reminder that the real net cost of healthcare when you cut back is almost always lower than the sticker price suggests. So running the actual number with subsidy eligibility and self-employed deduction scenarios is always worth the time. So once we have a real healthcare cost number, let's say $12,000 a year net of subsidy for Sarah. Well, now we can build an actual budget, not a fear-based estimate, but an actual budget. And that brings us to the adjusted financial independence number. Most CRNAs and NPs that I work with have heard of the 4% rule. It's the idea that you can withdraw 4% of your portfolio per year in retirement without running out of money over a 30-year period. Now, it's a very useful framework, but it's the wrong application for someone who's cutting back rather than stopping. Sarah doesn't need her portfolio to replace $165,000. She needs it to cover the gap between what she earns at 3 days a week and what she actually spends. Here's how that math works for her. At 3 days a week, she's earning roughly $90,000 per year. Her actual annual spending, her mortgage is paid off, her kids are through school, she's living the life that she wants, is $120,000 per year. So the gap is $30,000 per year. Now you add the healthcare cost, remember $12,000 per year, so the total gap that the portfolio needs to cover is $42,000 a year. At a 4% withdrawal rate, you need $1.05 million to generate $42,000 annually. Well, Sarah has $920,000. She's $130,000 away from the number, not $920,000 away from it. So that is a completely different conversation from the one she was having in her head. Now, some CRNAs and NPs I talk to will hear that and immediately say, okay, so I need to work 2 more years to close the gap. Maybe, but there's more to the picture. Her portfolio is still growing while she's working. At $920,000, even at a conservative 5% average return, she's adding roughly $46,000 per year in growth before she touches it. Well, that closes the gap without requiring additional contributions. More importantly, the $42,000 per year gap doesn't stay at $42,000 forever. At 65, Medicare replaces her ACA coverage, and that $12,000 healthcare line drops significantly. At whatever age she files for Social Security, 62, 67, or 70, well, that income replaces a portion of what the portfolio is covering. So the adjusted financial independence number is a snapshot at one point in time. When you model it as a dynamic picture with your portfolio growing, your healthcare costs changing, Social Security phasing in, then the gap closes faster than most CRNAs and NPs expect. Now, life is not that linear, and neither is the math, but the structure is sound. The third piece is portfolio drawdown sequencing. This is where a lot of people make an expensive mistake. Not because they don't have enough, but because they pull from the wrong accounts in the wrong order. Most nurses, when they think about drawing down a portfolio, think about it as one account. They see $920,000 and they think, I'll pull from my retirement savings. But where you pull from and when determines how much of that money actually ends up in your pocket versus going to the IRS. So Sarah has 3 buckets: a taxable brokerage account, a 401k, which is pre-tax dollars, and a Roth IRA, which is after-tax dollars. The sequencing rule is taxable first, pre-tax second, Roth last. And here's why that sequencing matters. When Sarah cuts back at 54, her income drops to $90,000. This is well below what she was earning. So her tax bracket drops with it. That creates a window to do something very valuable: Roth conversions. In the years before Social Security and before Medicare, while her taxable income is lower, she can move money from her pre-tax 401k into her Roth IRA at a lower tax rate than she would have paid during her high earning years. Now, she's not converting everything, she's converting enough each year to fill her lower tax brackets without pushing herself into a higher one. Why does this matter for a CRNA or NP cutting back rather than fully retiring? Because the pre-tax 401k balance does not stop growing when she cuts back. It keeps growing. And at age 73, the IRS is going to require her to start taking money out of it, whether she needs the income or not. And if she hasn't done any conversion work in the years between 54 and 73, then those required minimum distributions are going to arrive alongside her Social Security income. So they stack, and the combined income will push her into a higher tax bracket than she needs to be in. So this Roth conversion window, the years when her income is reduced but the portfolio is still there, this is when she addresses that before it becomes a problem. It's not complicated at all. It's just sequencing. Taxable first, convert while income is low, Roth last. Now let me show you what this actually looks like for Sarah with the full picture in place. She cuts back to 3 days a week at 54. Her income is $90,000 per year now. She pulls from her taxable brokerage account to cover the $42,000 annual gap between her income and expenses. Simultaneously, she converts $30,000 to $40,000 per year from her 401k into her Roth IRA, thus filling the space in her lower tax brackets while her income is down. Her total tax picture in year one of reduced hours is actually cleaner than it was when she was earning $165,000. By age 62, she evaluates Social Security timing. If she files at 62, she might collect $22,000 to $26,000 per year. That reduces the gap that the portfolio needs to cover from $42,000 down to roughly $16,000 to $20,000. And then at age 65, Medicare replaces the ACA Marketplace plan. The $12,000 healthcare line becomes a Medicare premium meaningfully lower, so the gap narrows for her further. And by her early 70s, Sarah's Roth bucket has now been growing for nearly 20 years. Her required minimum distributions are smaller than they would have been because she did the conversion work in the window. Her taxable income in retirement is lower. Her Medicare premiums are lower because of the IRMA thresholds, and her plan has held up through the entire arc. She didn't need $165,000 to stay solvent. She needed $42,000 per year of gap coverage, a sequencing strategy, and someone to model it clearly instead of leaving her to guess. And one thing I want to name that rarely comes up in these conversations. For most CRNAs and nurse practitioners, the decision to cut back is not just a financial decision. It is an identity decision. You have spent years, often decades, building expertise in a role that carries real weight. So stepping back from that, even partially, can feel like losing something important about who you are. Now, I am not a therapist, and I won't pretend that the financial clarity solves the identity piece. But I can tell you what I have seen consistently. When the financial fear is removed from the equation, the identity question becomes a lot easier to sit with. People can think more clearly about what they actually want, not just what they can afford. The CRNAs and NPs who get stuck the longest are almost always stuck on both things at once: the financial uncertainty and the identity uncertainty tangled together. Separating them helps. Running the math gives you clarity on one side of it, and what you do with that clarity is yours to decide. And here's the most important thing I want nurses to take away from this episode. Financial paralysis, the feeling of being trapped, almost never comes from actually being trapped. It comes from modeling the wrong problem. Full retirement math applied to a cutback scenario will always make the numbers look impossible. That is not your financial reality. That's a modeling error. When you model what you're actually asking for, partial income, adjusted spending, healthcare costs with real subsidy math, Roth conversion sequencing through your gap years, then the picture changes. Not always immediately, not always completely, but for most CRNAs and NPs who I work with who are in Sarah's situation, the answer is not you can't afford to slow down. The answer is you needed to see this laid out. We work with nurses 45 and older with $750,000 or more saved. If you've been telling yourself that you can't afford to cut back and you've never actually had someone run the math for you, that is exactly what a pre-op assessment is for. It's a free 30-minute call where we look at your actual numbers and tell you clearly where you stand. Click this link in the show notes to schedule yours, or you can do so directly at connectwithbrett.com. Take care of yourself and take care of your money.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. This podcast does not engage in rendering legal, financial, or other professional services.